Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Using my sportscasting background, I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players to gain more insight on what makes this team go. As the Detroit Lions enter a new gritty era, we'll look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we preview the Detroit Lions' home opening matchup with the Seattle Seahawks. What do we know about Seattle? What are we expecting from each team, as well as the expected Ford Field atmosphere and what we view as vitals for success?
Hi, everyone. This is Herman Moore, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
I'm joined by Coach Jerry Angers, named Michigan High School Coach of the Year, as well as Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions. He's mentored numerous players to the college level and some all the way to the NFL. Good to have you here as always, Coach.
Yes, for sure, Matt. Great talking to you, especially after going 1-0 last week.
It sets a nice atmosphere for us to start this episode, doesn't it?
Oh, for sure. Going, oh my God, what's going to happen week one? Well, we found out.
We did. We found out what happened week one. So on to week two. Let's start talking about how Seattle is different this year from last year. I mean, last year they were a team that went 9-8. They made the playoffs over the Detroit Lions. They beat the Lions head-to-head in Ford Field 48-45. So since that time, they've added some talent to this roster. The number 5 overall pick, defensive back Devin Witherspoon, a player a lot of people mock drafted to the Detroit Lions. We might never know if he would have been the pick because we didn't get a chance to see if the Lions would have selected him there. At pick 20, they took wide receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba, highly talented receiver, to go with an already talented receiving core. They drafted linebacker Derek Hall in the second round and a running back, Zach Charbonnet. They also grabbed a guard in the fourth round. A couple free agents they picked up. Evan Brown, offensive lineman, former Detroit Lion, played a big role with the Lions last year. And they brought their heralded linebacker Bobby Wagner back. There's no major losses that I know of. So how do those players change this team, Coach?
Oh, I think it's definitely going to help them. You know, you pick up a guy like Witherspoon, who, you know, we were looking at drafting him. You and I talked about him numerous times. Now this would be his first game playing, if I'm correct, right? I don't think he played last week, or he's a little bit banged up last week. I know that they're going to have him this week. Jackson Smith-Njigba, I mean, another great receiver to help them out. The nice thing is Branch played against him in the Natty in 2020. So somebody that we got another guy to offset something that they've done. You know, offensive line wise, you know, that should definitely help them out. But again, I know we're going to touch on the injury bug that's hitting them right now this week. And encourage, bring Wagner back, great leader for them on and off the field as a great career and a great linebacker, which should help them become a better defensive unit. So, yeah, they definitely added some pieces to help out a 9-8 team that's pretty good last year. But it's going to be fun to play them this year. That's for sure.
It will be. And yeah, you're correct. Devin Witherspoon did not play in the opening week. I agree. They added talent to an already talented roster. There's some question marks on that team, and we can talk about them. But let's get into the next part. What do we expect out of Seattle coming into this game? Now, the Seahawks did not look like the team we thought they would with that week 1 loss to the Rams. Now, we have to remember we cannot overreact to season openers, but that's all the film. That's all the tape we have to go on at this point. They lost 30-13. Geno Smith was 16 of 26 for like 112 yards and 1 touchdown. Now, that being said, they have a talented group of wide receivers. They have a talented running back room. And I expect those players to be showcasing a little bit more of their skills, or trying to at least, this week.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, here's the one thing you got to think about. Pete Carroll is a heck of a coach. You know, he's one of the better coaches in the league. He's been around a long time. He gets his most out of his players. You know, you take what happened to them last week. You know, Metcalf, 3 receptions for 47 yards. And he got frustrated. I think we got a big 15-yard penalty. You know, Kenneth Walker, you know, he was 12 for 63 or 64, somewhere in there. Of course, Jackson Smith, first time out, 3 receptions, 13 yards. Geno, like you said. And I think that's one of the things you're going to get. You're going to get a Pete Carroll mad football team. Pete Carroll is going to get the best out of his players. Every one of those guys that I just mentioned, if they had a bad game or didn't have a game that was up to their standards, they're going to come back and try to be that much better and play that much harder. They had a ton of success against the Lions last year. So those are things that are going to come into play for that. You will not see a Pete Carroll team play like a Pete Carroll team played last week. You just don't see him back to back. That's why he's been so successful. So it's kind of like a caged lion. Oh no, we're the Lions. That's right. It's kind of a guy backed into the corner, and what's going to happen with them? Are they going to go to 0-2? And I think that's one of the things that we better be aware of.
Yeah, there's a lot to take away from that game. I think that the first thing is the injuries. You kind of talked about that. I think there's going to be an attitude coming in, and we're going to get to that. But the injuries, offensive tackles, right? Charles Cross and Abe Lucas both sustained injuries in the loss to the Rams. They just signed offensive tackle Jason Peters, the 41-year-old 9-time Pro Bowler, to their practice squad. If one of those guys or both of those guys can't go, would not be shocked to see him elevated. Highly talented guy, later end of his career. So those are the Seahawks injuries.
Yeah, Weatherspoon definitely is, playing on that set, and Lockett was banged up a little bit too. So, they're one of their best, their second best receiver, if not their best receiver. So I think those are things that I think you're correct. And the offensive line, I'm not sure if Yvette brought up one of their other offensive linemen that was on practice squad. I can't remember if they re-signed him or if they're going to bring him up. So they went after 2 tackles already. So that's something we're going to see.
All right. And, I caught glimpses of this game, and I was expecting to see something a little bit different in the box score. I thought when I looked at it, I would see the Seattle defense gave up a ton of rushing yards to the Rams, but really it was just like 92 yards, which isn't anything bad. It's actually pretty good. And that surprised me because the glimpses I saw, it appeared the Rams were having some success running. But when I looked at that box score, what really stood out is that Matthew Stafford threw for 334 yards to a bunch of wide receivers not named Cooper Kupp and ones that you probably cannot name.
Yeah, that's correct. What's that one guy's name that had 18 targets or 15 targets? He's another one of those guys that people are starting to say, how did he fall that far in the draft?
Yeah, I think you're talking about Puka Nakua.
Yeah, it's him. I was going to say it, but I didn't want to mess the name up, so I figured you handle it for me.
Yeah. I don't know if I got it completely right, but that's exactly it. So it surprised me seeing that they gave up so many yards passing in that situation. Stafford's a great quarterback. Obviously, the receivers aren't household names, as I just proved right there. The other thing that stood out to me is that Seattle's offense had 180 total yards combined passing and rushing when you factor in the sacks. That is mind-blowing to me. 180 total yards for the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Let's talk in the defense side of the ball. They had all those passes thrown against them, yet Woolen had 1 reception, only 5 yards on 81 snaps. So that means they were picking on that other side and that other corner, which now we have to look at Witherspoon maybe playing that position. So now that, that's going to be something I'm sure that the Lions are working on. You look at the yardage that they had. Geno threw for over 4,000 yards last year. Walker rushed for over 1,000 yards last year. Metcalf had over 1,000 receiving yards last year. Lockett had over 1,000 receiving yards last year. You look at that, and then what they did to us week 3 or week 4 was unbelievable. You can't, you look at what they did to us in that situation, that 48-45 game, and there's some concerns when we look at going back to what I said about Pete Carroll coming in, is that them playing that bad last week, what's going to happen this week?
Well, that's exactly it. And again, we said 180 yards of total combined passing and rushing. I don't know that the Rams defense is expected to be that good this season. So I think that's the other reason that surprised me. But don't think for a minute that the Lions are going to sleep on Seattle. I mean, Seattle had that victory last year. We talked about how high scoring it was. The Lions never made them punt last year. And, Dan Campbell already addressed this. He talked about how difficult the Seattle Seahawks have been in recent years for the Detroit Lions. This is what he had to say in his media session.
But this team always presents problems. It's been a thorn in our side for 2 years. And so, we know what's going to be coming in here. We're going to assume the best out of them. And they got after us pretty good last year. Real good. So that's something we won't forget.
So that tells you right there that Coach Campbell is not going to expect the team we saw last week in Seattle. He's expecting the last year Seattle team, if not better.
Oh, I totally agree on that. I mean, that's the biggest thing is, we haven't touched on it. Let's get in, since we're talking about Dan Campbell in that situation. What's he saying this week? What's he doing this week with these guys right now? Well, hey, we're one. It seemed like it was an eternity ago that we played against the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, that was so long. That was last week. We're almost in, and so that's all gone. They're going to try to get to 1-0 this week. But Dan Campbell is going to talk about giving up 48 points to these guys last year. Dan Campbell and the staff are going to talk about the Seattle Seahawks beating Los Angeles last year to knock us out of the playoffs. So I don't care what, and it doesn't matter what they did last week. Dan Campbell and that staff are going to be, I believe it, are going to be focused, as well as the players, on the Seattle Seahawks that put 48 on us last year, on the Seattle Seahawks that knocked us out of the playoff last year. That's the team we're playing, Matt.
That is exactly it. And well said. That was going right to my next question. I was like, what's the coach saying as they're preparing for this team in week 2? And you hit the nail on the head. And that was like the Karate Kid. It just took one hit. Boom, that nail went all the way in. That was beautiful because they did knock them out. If you think about it for a minute, the Rams beat Seattle last week, but they couldn't beat them the week we really needed them to do it. And so thank you, Rams. I guess they needed Matthew Stafford playing and not Baker Mayfield, but I digress. So yeah, there's a lot to work on to prepare for this team. And Dan Campbell's got all the ammunition he needs. The Lions have lost the last 2 years in a row to Seattle. They did not make them punt. That defense has all the motivation it needs. And the whole team does, knowing that, hey, that's the team that got into the playoffs instead of us.
Yeah, for sure. And, and that's the thing he's going to build on. We talked about that. We talked about what their goal is. I mean, let's get into that situation about being the 1-0 thing. Look at the press conference after the victory last week. Seahawks, we won a game last week because some guy wasn't playing. I don't remember who the guy is. I never even heard his name on the announcing. I don't think they even announced who sat out. Those are the things that we had some communication problems in the backfield. Brian Branch talked about that on his interception. And again, of course, that interception was because some receiver dropped a bunch of balls. Okay. They didn't talk about how we put pressure on Patrick Mahomes and made him maybe throw those balls behind the receivers and stuff like that. So those are things that the Lions will get into during this week. We talked about it, from a coaching standpoint. Week 1 to week 2 is always the biggest climb on getting better, because you learn some things that you can't learn in practices or pre-games or, combined practices with other teams. And that's live action, loud crowds, not being able to hear to communicate and understanding, what we're supposed to be doing in that situation. So those are the things that they're going to work on, which I hopefully is going to offset what Pete Carroll's going to do to come in and try to upset us.
So what do you think the Lions offense or defense might be working on? I think you kind of touched on the communication issue a little bit. I think that's one that the defense is going to work on. But like you said, between that first week of all those new pieces playing together, you're expecting to see a nice climb to that second week. Anything different you might see them working on, though?
Yeah, I really don't think so. I think we've addressed that, validated. I think Campbell said in his press conference, we addressed those different things that we needed. I think our defensive line is quicker. I think our DB field is quicker. I think our linebackers are playing faster. And I think those are things about, you got Geno Smith who can run the football. You got Kay Walker, Walker, who's a really good back. You got DK Metcalf, who's just a giant wide receiver. And then if Lockett plays, and of course with Smith, I think we addressed all those things, and that's what they were working on. Communication part and all that is gonna take its toll, because those are gonna help us to make sure we're in the right coverages in certain situations. And we're also gonna have we have a game plan from last year that they're probably going to be looking at, where the Chiefs, we didn't have a game plan from last year to work on. So I think those are all good things that are going to help us out. And that's why your growth in week 2 is going to be so much better, not only because of the mistakes we made against the Chiefs, but also the mistakes that we made against the Seahawks last year are going to be changed over this year.
All right, well, then let's look at what we expect from Detroit as well. Injury-wise, Taylor Decker's status is probably the big one to keep an eye on. He left wearing a boot. He missed practice on Tuesday. So I haven't heard anything other than that. Have you heard anything?
I just was reading some tweets, and one he sent out that he continues to get people that are saying they will cut their toe off to give to him, which I just love. And Decker just said, I appreciate it. Don't worry. I will be fine. And, those guys are the dudes in the trenches are a different breed, man. And, that guy's going to probably tape it, maybe put an aspirin between the two toes and just go to work and play football. That's what our offensive line is all about.
That's awesome. I love the attitude out of Taylor Decker. I mean, he's the one that said it, not the same old Lions. So you got to give the man some credit there too.
For sure.
So another thing I think we're going to see is more Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, he's gotten a game under his belt. Plus, James Cook said on the last show, I never heard anything official, but he talked about Jahmyr Gibbs' eye. And if you saw Gibbs' post-game interview, it looked like he might have had an issue with his eye. That could have contributed to some of his touches, but also having a game under his belt, I think they're going to probably expand his role. I think Campbell even talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's what they talk about, where they're going to, baby step him in, not give him 40 touches, get him acclimated to the game and to the speed of the game. And I'm going to go into that. I think it was the fourth quarter. He had the one run, or third quarter. He had the run. He bounced it outside and gained a yard or two because he wanted to use his speed. If he hits the seam, if he hits the inside seam, it's probably going to be a big, big gainer, if not taking it to the house. That's on film now. They're going to show him that and say, look, dude, believe in the plan, believe in the idea, believe in what we got, take those, put your foot in the dirt, go vertical, and then use your speed on the outside. And again, I love what they did. Everybody, I know you're a lot of the fans, man, he should have touched the ball 50 times a game. But Monty, Montgomery did a great job and did exactly what he wanted to. Look at the big first down he had in the fourth quarter on us, because he's just a bull. And he wants to run people over, and yet he's still got cut. He's still got cut ability, and he's a pretty good blocker. I mean, he did take one on the chin during that game, but I like the way they used him, and it's going to be great as they continue to put the ball in his hands some more with Gibbs.
I agree with that completely. I mean, I still love that 8-yard touchdown run by Montgomery. That thing was a work of art, set up by a nice block by one of our amazing rookies. And that's the other great thing is these running backs complement each other really well and have overlap, which you have different skill sets a little bit, but you don't have varying degree of drop off in certain talent levels with one on the field versus the other. So as long as one of them's out there, I'm feeling pretty good.
Oh yeah, I'm not concerned. Watch the game last night with the Jets. They have two pretty good running backs, and they used them both. And everybody's probably saying, "Oh my God, Cook should be in there more." Oh my,
Hall.
God, yeah, thank you, Hall, Brees Hall. And they used them. They use them in situations that they need them, and we know that that's what the Lions did in their drafts. They've drafted people to do certain things in certain situations, and they'll develop Gibbs into that person that can do things in all situations, as well as Montgomery.
So another thing expecting to see from the Lions, and this could even go into a prediction category, but I'm hoping or thinking we might see the Lions take a shot or two a little bit deeper this week, because we didn't really see much of that last week.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I listened to Campbell's press conference, I think it was yesterday, and he talked about his wide receivers. And I think, with Reynolds, he had the big catch. I was, again, talking about Dan Campbell's press conference on him, was he does so much for them and just does things and makes big plays when he needs to make big plays. And I think those are things we miss. He might have two catches, but they're two big catches. He has some great blocks. He runs the X, he runs the Z, he'll run slot. He was saying that he'll run different things. Again, what does he do? That helps St. Brown, because, then they got to worry about him in certain spots. So, he's just another one of those, I guess we call him a role player, but he makes big plays when we need him.
He does. I remember, halfway through that season when we got him off waivers 2 seasons ago, towards the end of that season, I was like, man, I hope the Lions bring him back because I think he's an underrated guy. Last year was an injury-riddled season for him. So you could see him regain some of his old form. I mean, he caught a touchdown in that 54-51 win against Kansas City like 5 years ago. So I'm excited to see Reynolds maybe even play a little bit bigger role this coming week. The wide receiving core will be something to keep an eye on.
Yep, that is for sure.
So here's something that I kind of think is a flip from last week. Kansas City has the best quarterback, but maybe not the best wide receivers. Seattle has some of the best wide receivers. And we're waiting to see what we have in Geno Smith. He put up some amazing numbers last year. He made the Pro Bowl. But that's the only season he's done that in the NFL. So I think we need to see if he can repeat that and stay at that level, or if maybe if it was a one-year thing. So by no means am I saying the Lions should not be afraid of him, but his level and Patrick Mahomes' level are two very different levels. So I don't think he's got the same passing ability as Patrick Mahomes, but as you point out, he does have some scrambling ability. And so that'll be an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
Yep, I agree. And, and again, he is still continuing to prove himself and to get rid of the doubters, and I think that's one of the things, he's going to take last week's game and say, I'm going to turn that around, because he's going to try to answer the question you just answered. Can he do it? Does he have 2 bad games in a row? From what I watched him last year, I didn't see a lot of that. Again, he's not the best quarterback in the league. Who knows where he's top 10, top 15, top 20. We don't know, but he is scary enough to be worried about because of his legs. And I think that's one thing that they'll be addressing with our D lines and our linebackers. It'll be interesting to see if we have a spy on him, or we're just going to use our lane rushes, keep him in the pocket and run him down when he gets out of the pocket.
Exactly, because it was a year ago he led a team that never punted and put up 48 points against our defense. So that'll be very interesting to keep an eye on. So let's look at any other major storylines or anything unexpected by either team. Now, one thing is we're keeping an eye on the injury status of some players. That'll be worth looking at leading up to the game, because that could have some influences on some things. Geno Smith, we talked about him and what his play is going to look like. Another one I'm thinking is the Detroit Lions rookies, the 4. I'm just going to say the 4.
Okay.
You've got Gibbs, you've got Campbell, you've got Laporta, and you've got Branch. They all did great. Can they do it 2 weeks in a row? I think that's going to be an interesting storyline to watch.
Oh, for sure. And again, we, we'll go back to the old thing. They're going to get better from week 1 to week 2. Branch said it. I read a thing on him today talking about his interception. He said he's watched it 100 times. He's watched it over 100 times. People are saying you've probably watched it over 100 times, because like he said, it was when I was a little kid, I dreamed about having something like this happen. And then again, he says, I did it against Patrick Mahomes, which I also was dreaming about. But then after him basically building himself up, he said, but man, I got a lot of work. I got a lot of things to learn. I got to work on my communication back there. I messed up some things. So those are things when you look at rookies and you hear them talk, and yeah, they should be boasting about themselves, but they should also say, that's behind, that's last week. That was my first game. Wait till you see me this week. And that's what I heard from him. And I think Laporta, I think Campbell, I think they're all going to do the exact same thing. The 4, they're going to get better. They're going to learn from their mistakes. And, you look at Campbell, look at that. Campbell has a huge pass breakup because he's 6'5" or 6'4.5". He dives, knocks the ball down, which puts them into another passing down, which turns into a throw, which turns into a tip ball, which turns into a rookie taking it to the house. Those, man, when you see things like that, you're going, I think you and I were texting back and forth going, rookies. So it's great stuff.
It wasn't, Sam Laporta, you don't even have to talk about him a lot, but he played a major role blocking and catching. So they got more than I think a lot of people outside of the state were thinking they would get, but we've been on board this draft since the night it happened. So that's exciting. The defense, I want to see. I think the defense and offense will be real interesting to watch. I think we're going to learn more about them. And I think they could both have better weeks in week 2 than they did in week 1. So they're returning home for that game. Let's talk about it. The home opener. Let's talk about the expected atmosphere. You and I attended preseason games there at preseason levels we haven't expected. But let's go back to last year. I was at the Green Bay game in Detroit last year. The Lions were 1-6 going into that game. It was a good atmosphere, but it wasn't nearly sold out. And then a handful of weeks later, after they got on that run, you went to the Minnesota game, and it was a different animal. Remind the listeners what that was like for you last year in the Minnesota game.
It was just one of those things. Like I told you, I had season tickets or attended 10 years of Lions games when I lived down there in the Pontiac Silverdome era with 80,000 people screaming and making noise. And it was loud. The Silverdome seemed like it was always loud because there was some fights in the stands, especially when Green Bay and Chicago came in. But the atmosphere, the national anthem, to the Joseph doing a flip coming out, to Sewell making that catch, to the Lion King baby cam, those things. And I just watched that and listened to that stadium erupt time after time. And I just, when Dan Campbell was on his press conference, he hasn't even left the Chiefs field, and he's telling our fans they're going to be louder than Arrowhead Stadium. They're taking it on right now. Our fans right now have been drooling since he said that. He brought it up again yesterday in his press conference. We're going to be the loudest. We are the loudest. And I can't wait to hear it. I mean, I wish I was going to be there, but I tell you right now, all I know is I want to hear that crowd from Southern Michigan all the way up there to Houghton and Hancock. And we can turn some of those Packers fans into Lions fans.
It's not that often there's an earthquake in Michigan. So if we can get something from Southeast Michigan, Detroit, across the state, and even maybe, reverberating across that Mackinac Bridge, that would be amazing. Well, you mentioned his comments. Let's, the listeners, in case someone didn't get a chance to hear him, let's hear a little bit of what he said.
I've mentioned this before. My first game ever here as a player, 2006. It was actually Seattle, and I just remember I was not expecting that, and it was loud. It was loud, and I'd been in some loud places and been around, and I was not expecting it, and that was my first eye opener to wow. We get some wins here, and this place will really be on fire. So yeah, I'm expecting it to be loud. I'm expecting, I know what Arrowhead is, and it was loud. I expect it to be louder than that. I really do. I just know our fans.
So that's it right there. I mean, Campbell's setting the scene. I mean, I am heading down to that game, and I am beyond excited, not just for the game, but to see what this crowd can be. Maybe the best attended game at Ford Field in some time, and an atmosphere like we've never seen. So I got to say, get there early, folks. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, I would be in there. As soon as those gates are open, I'd probably be the first one in front of the door, even if I have to get there at 9 a.m. to get there. So it's going to be fun, Matt. You're definitely going to enjoy it. All I ask is that you turn your phone on and call me and just hold it up in the air so I can listen to it.
I can do that for you for sure. I'd be happy to do that. All right, Coach, here we are. Predictions based on our overreactions to week 1. All right. Now, last week in our preview show for Kansas City, I said the Lions would do a trick play. I said I had a good feeling about it, and Campbell did it. I mean, I about freaked out. Well, I did freak out, especially because he did it from his own 17-yard line. He also kept up his aggressive nature, of all things, right? Going for it late on fourth and a couple in the fourth quarter. And it didn't work, but it was calculated, and he wasn't just haphazard about it because he did punt earlier in the game when they were across midfield rather than going for it on fourth and a few. And Coach Campbell talked about his aggressiveness from his time in Miami and said, he didn't really use his special teams enough. So, Coach, what are some of your predictions or thoughts for this game?
Well, I think, I know it's not going to be 48-45, I really have that feeling because our defense is much better. I think, you take the Chiefs game and you learn from it and you move on. And my prediction is the Lions are going to be 1-0 this week.
I like that. That's a solid prediction, and that's all you can ask for. I'm going to throw a couple of things out there because before the season, I kind of said if the Lions started the season 4-2, I would be very happy. And I was thinking those first 2 games were going to be the toughest ones of all 6 of those. But again, you got to remember, folks, we never know how good or bad a team is going to be. The Lions were supposed to have a very easy schedule last year, but that didn't happen. We had one of the tougher ones. And we saw a crazy divisional game with Green Bay and Chicago just last week. Now, are the Packers that good? Is Chicago that bad? Or is the truth somewhere in the middle? This year I'm putting games into the could win or should win category. And before the season, I really wasn't sure where to put this one. But that Kansas City game was a could win, and we did it. That's amazing. I think because of that win, knowing that Ford Field is going to be electric for the home opener, and even though Seattle's had the Lions number, I'm putting this into the should win category. I don't expect it to be nearly as high scoring as last year, and I expect the Seattle to play better than last week, but I think the Lions are going to come out with a W.
I like to hear that.
Coach, any final thoughts before we get out of here and wrap this thing up?
No, just looking forward to watching their game again. But as we know, as these weeks fly by, we're trying to have answers of validation of what we believe is true, just like Dan Campbell said it. And I think each one of these weeks are the ones where we want to see, did they get better? And again, this is another one of those weeks. We were so excited about last week's game. I'm as excited about this week's game because, like you said, we want to see where we've improved and did we get better? And are we reading our press clippings? Are we worried about 1 week at a time? And I'm believing they're worried about 1 week at a time.
Awesome, Coach. Always appreciate your insights, and I'm looking forward to seeing that this week as well. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. You can find all the episodes at notthesameoldlions.com. And if you have questions about the Lions you'd like answered on the show, email me, Matthew at notthesameoldlions.com. If you're listening on YouTube, please hit the like button. While you're at it, tell your friends about the show and subscribe regardless of your listening platform. Until next time, stay gritty, my friends.